Thanks for having me on again, Sheila. It's always nice to be on your show. Yes, we actually, the NFA has an NGO seat at the United Nations. We're the only gun advocacy group in Canada that has a seat at the United Nations. So we've been there over the last few years, but it's getting more important now that we show up there. There's a lot of stuff going on at the United Nations right now. I was there, and I'll actually read it here because it's quite a name they have it. I was there for the 4th United Nations Conference to review progress made in the implementation of the Program of Action, short form POA, to prevent, combat, eradicate the illicit trade in small arms and light weapons in all its aspects. The short form for it is RevCon 4. So what it says, it's supposed to be about illicit firearms, but at the end of the day, it's about all firearms. The United Nations, this is my first experience at the United Nations. It's quite a different place to be at. We were there, Ginger Fournier, our general manager, and I attended for 5 days, and it was grueling. It was absolutely grueling. We spent every day, basically from 10 o'clock to 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening, listening to different countries from around the world with their perspectives about firearms, illicit firearms, firearms ownership, and where it's going. Most of it, for the first 3 or 4 days, what they do is they try to make amendments every day and put out a different revision every day. It started off mostly talking about gender-based violence with illicit firearms, domestic violence with illicit firearms, violence against women and children, again, with illicit firearms, which really, they're using the word illicit firearms, but they're meaning firearms in general.
Right.
It actually got as far as to say the illicit use of firearms is responsible for climate change. That's... Yes, they actually made that statement. It's actually in the final document that they're actually calling climate change is due to the illicit use of firearms. That I almost fell out of my chair when I heard that, Sheila. It was unbelievable. So what went on is every day it was developing countries mostly speaking on this stuff. So every day, everybody had a chance to speak that wanted to speak. I'll get into the Canadian delegation a little later, but I'll just start off with the basics first. The Canadian delegation was a challenge also. But anyway, I'll get on to the basics. So every day, these people from these developing countries had this prepared document speech that they presented to the president of the United Nations. And they went on about... how illicit firearms and firearms in general are causing havoc in their countries due to, the illegal importation of firearms, mostly against it's mostly gender-based violence. Domestic violence is the next biggest player. Then, of course, the women and children. They played that routine. So each day, these countries have made these presentations. Then they argued on, then there's a few countries that oppose this stuff, and they're actually countries that we really shouldn't be associated with, like Cuba, Russia, Ukraine, Egypt. They were opposed to this stuff because they were trying to put in place words like gender instead of sex. And there's a big back and forth ensued after that. It should be gender instead of sex, and of course, it wasn't all developing nations, but it's mostly developing nations went back and forth on this gender and sex thing. And so they'd clear it up. They'd soften it up for the next amendment, the next revision the following day. And they kept doing that. So what we were doing as Canada's National Firearms, and I just want to say, the NFA will be attending United Nations as long as Canada has a delegation there, because we need somebody from Canada to challenge the Canadians. At the end of the day, they're on an opposite page we are. We approached Ginger and I approached the delegate from Canada. So I said to her, I introduced myself. I had never met her before. I introduced myself and I said, I'm here representing Canada's National Firearms Association and law-abiding firearms owners from Canada. She says, well, I'm here. My fixed point is domestic violence on a global level. I'm not familiar with any firearms-related events in Canada. I go, you're kidding, basically. And she says, no, I'm just here to deal with the world stuff. So at the end of the day, it was futile even to speak to her anymore during the meetings. But luckily, I myself and the NFA has developed really good connections with some other groups over the last 3 years since I've been doing this international stuff. One of them, a couple of them actually are out of the States, Americans, and there's a couple out of the European Union that are on our side. So what we did, any point we needed to get across to have delegates speak about, we talked to our American colleagues. They passed it on to the delegates and got it out on the floor. So at the end of the day, we've got some of our points across. There's a lot of stuff in here, and the big one was I didn't even get to that. I haven't even spoke about what we were really focused on, and what we were focused on were a couple of things. The big thing was tracing of firearms and parts. What the UN wants is to mark every part on a firearm, including the smallest spring, so they can, if this firearm turns up somewhere on the planet, they can trace that part back to its original origin. There's a couple problems with that. Number one, the way lawsuits go these days, and something happens with that firearm, it opens up the possibility of suing the guy that made that spring in I don't know where. Right. It opens them up to a lawsuit. The other problem is when you're talking marking parts on a firearm, you're talking doubling or tripling the price of that firearm. So in my opinion, what they're trying to do by doing this, again, is like the Canadian government does, is they're trying to get rid of firearms by attrition. They're killing us by attrition. It's the same deal worldwide as it is in Canada. The thing about the United Nations, they make all these proclamations. You know, at the end of this conference, they made, 80 or 90 proclamations. Proclamations are not enforceable. United Nations proclamations are not enforceable. They can only be put into place if a government like ours takes them and uses them, which no doubt Justin Trudeau will take and put these into place. That's why they had their delegate there. They had their delegate there talking about domestic violence because, as you know, Sheila, things are starting to run pretty thin as far as using firearms as an election issue. Yeah. So now they're stretching it on to the domestic use of fire or the violence, domestic violence related to firearms. That's where they're pushing the issue these days. So I have no doubt that's why she was there, to get it out on the world stage. Give Canada's position on the world stage. It's all about elections and money. If you want to simplify it, this whole United Nations, it's all about getting the government elected by using some of these proclamations and money.